6 months after the biker incident, Willowbrook Estates had transformed into the peaceful community Marcus Sullivan had originally sought when he moved there. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the neighborhood during Karen Whitfield's reign had lifted like fog clearing after sunrise. Marcus sat on his front porch every morning with his coffee, watching children play safely on sidewalks while their parents chatted freely with neighbors. No one hurried past with downcast eyes, afraid of being cited for imaginary violations. No one whispered fearfully about the HOA president's latest tyrannical decree. The changes had been dramatic and swift. Under Sarah Morrison's leadership, the new HOA board had eliminated dozens of petty rules and focused on genuine community improvement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, established a community garden, and created a fund to help elderly residents maintain their properties. Property values had actually increased since Karen's removal. Despite her warnings about declining standards, potential buyers were attracted to a neighborhood known for its friendly atmosphere and reasonable HOA policies. Real estate agents specifically mentioned the Reformed Homeowners Association as a selling point. Marcus had become something of a neighborhood legend, though he tried to downplay his role in the transformation. Children waved to him as they walked to school. Teenagers offered to help with his yard work. Adults sought his advice on everything from home security to dealing with difficult people. "You taught us that we don't have to accept being pushed around," Frank explained during one of their regular morning conversations. "Karen ruled through fear because she convinced us we were powerless. You showed us that bullies are only strong when good people do nothing." The legal resolution of Karen's case had provided a satisfying conclusion to the neighborhood drama. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from dozens of harassed residents, Karen had accepted a plea agreement rather. News of Karen Whitfield's arrest spread through Willowbrook Estates like wildfire. By Monday morning, every resident knew that their tyrannical HOA president had been taken away in handcuffs for violating a restraining order. The story grew more dramatic with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. Karen had finally pushed the wrong person too far. Marcus Sullivan's military background became the subject of intense neighborhood speculation. Sarah Morrison had done some research online and discovered that Marcus had served in special operations. She shared this information during an impromptu gathering in Frank's backyard Sunday evening. "He was Delta Force," Sarah whispered to the assembled neighbors. "I found an old newspaper article about his unit receiving commendations for classified operations overseas. That explains how he handled those bikers so easily," Frank said with admiration. "I knew there was something different about him the first time we met." Dorothy nodded enthusiastically. "He has that quiet confidence you see in real heroes, not like those loud talkers who brag about their service but never saw real action." The revelation about Marcus's military background transformed how the neighborhood viewed him. He was no longer just the new neighbor who had stood up to Karen. He was a genuine American hero who had risked his life defending freedom abroad and was now defending freedom at home. More importantly, Marcus's victory over Karen had emboldened other residents to speak out about years of harassment and abuse. During Sarah's first week as interim HOA president, she received dozens of complaints about Karen's conduct. Robert Thompson brought documentation of Karen's attempts to force him to remove a healthy tree from his yard. "She claimed it violated height restrictions that don't exist anywhere in the city code," he explained. "When I refused, she threatened to put a lien on my house." The elderly couple from Elm Street described how Karen had tried to force them to repaint their house because she claimed the color was inappropriate for a family neighborhood. They had spent $3,000 on new paint to avoid further harassment. A young single father named David Chen revealed that Karen had called Child Protective Services on him, claiming his children were unsupervised. "The CPS worker said it was obviously a false report, but my kids were traumatized by the investigation." Story after story emerged of Karen's abuse of power. She had used the HOA as her personal weapon to terrorize anyone who challenged her authority. For 8 years, neighbors had suffered in silence because they feared making their situations worse. But Marcus's example had shown them that Karen could be defeated. If a Delta Force veteran could stand up to her harassment, then ordinary residents could do the same. Wednesday evening brought the most shocking revelation yet. Tony Whitfield, Karen's brother-in-law, showed up at the police station with his lawyer and a full confession about the Thunderbolts incident. "My client wants to cooperate fully with your investigation," Tony's lawyer announced to Detective Morrison, who had taken over the case from the patrol officers. "He has information about who hired the Thunderbolts to intimidate Mr. Sullivan." Tony explained everything. Karen's phone call asking for help with a neighborhood problem, his arrangement with the Thunderbolts, and the $2,000 Karen had paid for the intimidation attempt. She said the guy was some kind of military veteran who was causing trouble, Tony confessed. "She wanted us to send someone to explain neighborhood manners to him. I thought it would be easy money." Detective Morrison listened to Tony's confession with growing amazement. In 20 years of police work, he had never encountered someone stupid enough to hire bikers to intimidate a Delta Force operator. "Mr. Whitfield, you do understand that your sister-in-law basically paid you to send 8 men to attack one of the most dangerous individuals in the country?" Detective Morrison asked. "We didn't know he was Delta Force," Tony protested. "Karen said he was just some suburban tough guy who needed to be put in his place." "Well, he certainly put your bikers in their place," Detective Morrison observed. "I'm surprised any of them are still breathing." The confession provided the final piece of evidence needed to charge Karen with criminal conspiracy. Detective Morrison obtained a warrant for her arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit assault, criminal harassment, and solicitation of criminal conduct. Thursday morning, police officers knocked on Karen's door with handcuffs and a warrant. Karen had been expecting this moment since Tony's lawyer had called to inform her about his confession. She submitted to arrest without resistance, though she maintained her innocence to the end. "This is all a misunderstanding," Karen insisted as the officers read her rights. "I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I was just trying to protect my neighborhood." "Mrs. Whitfield, you hired bikers to intimidate a military veteran," Detective Morrison replied. "That's not protecting anyone. That's criminal conspiracy." Karen's second arrest made the front page of the local newspaper. The story included details about her harassment of Marcus Sullivan, the restraining order violation, and now the criminal conspiracy charges. Her mugshot appeared alongside quotes from relieved neighbors who felt free for the first time in years. The media attention attracted the interest of a local television news station. They interviewed Marcus Sullivan about his experience with Karen and the HOA harassment. "I served 20 years defending freedom and democracy overseas," Marcus told the reporter. "I never expected to have to defend those same principles from a homeowners association president in my own neighborhood." The interview made Marcus a local celebrity. Viewers were fascinated by the story of a decorated special operations veteran being harassed by a petty suburban tyrant. Social media posts about the story went viral, with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Marcus handled the attention with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the entire conflict. He gave interviews to several news outlets, always emphasizing that the real story was about ordinary citizens standing up to neighborhood bullies. "This isn't about me," Marcus explained to a newspaper reporter. "This is about people realizing they don't have to tolerate harassment and intimidation from anyone, no matter what position of authority they claim to hold." Friday evening brought the first HOA meeting under Sarah Morrison's leadership. The community center was packed with residents eager to discuss changes to their neighborhood association. Even people who had never attended meetings before showed up to participate. Marcus attended the meeting and received a standing ovation when Sarah introduced him. The applause lasted for several minutes as neighbors expressed their gratitude for his courage in standing up to Karen. "Mr. Sullivan showed us that bullies only have as much power as we give them," Sarah announced. "Thanks to his example, we're going to build a better HOA that serves the community instead of terrorizing it." The meeting focused on eliminating Karen's petty rules and establishing reasonable guidelines for community standards. Residents voted to eliminate the mailbox color requirement, the garage door restrictions, and dozens of other arbitrary regulations. They also voted to establish a formal complaint process for residents who felt they were being harassed by HOA officials. Never again would someone like Karen be able to terrorize their neighbors without oversight. Marcus spoke briefly at the end of the meeting. "I didn't move to Willowbrook Estates to become a neighborhood hero," he said. "I moved here for peace and quiet, but sometimes peace requires standing up to people who threaten it." As the meeting ended, neighbors lined up to shake Marcus's hand and thank him personally. Many of them shared stories about how Karen had made their lives miserable and how grateful they were that someone had finally stopped her. Frank summed up the neighborhood's feelings perfectly. "Marcus, you saved our community. Karen was destroying everything good about living here. Now we can actually enjoy our homes again." The weekend brought news that Karen had been released on bail, but was facing serious jail time if convicted. Her lawyer was trying to negotiate a plea deal that would involve probation and community service instead of prison. But the legal consequences were only part of Karen's punishment. The social consequences were equally devastating. Former friends avoided her in public. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Local businesses had heard about her criminal charges and treated her with suspicion. Karen had become a pariah in the community she had once controlled. She spent most of her time hiding in her house, afraid to show her face in public. Real estate agents had told her that selling her house would be difficult because of the negative publicity surrounding her arrest. Sunday afternoon, Marcus was working in his yard when a car pulled into his driveway. A middle-aged man in a military uniform got out and walked over to introduce himself. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Colonel James Harrison from Fort Braxton. I wanted to meet the Delta Force operator who's been making headlines for defeating bikers and homeowners associations." Marcus laughed and shook the colonel's hand. "Just trying to live quietly in retirement, sir." "Well, you've certainly made an impression on people," Colonel Harrison said. "Your story has been circulating through special operations units across the country. Everyone's talking about the neighborhood Karen who picked a fight with Delta Force." Karen Whitfield stared at the legal papers in her hands, reading them for the fourth time. The words seemed to blur together as panic clouded her thoughts. A restraining order, a civil lawsuit, an investigation into her conduct as HOA president. Everything she had worked to build in Willowbrook Estates was crumbling around her. She grabbed her phone and called the only lawyer she knew, a man named Greg Patterson who had helped her with real estate paperwork when she bought her house. Greg listened patiently as Karen explained her situation, though she carefully left out any mention of the Thunderbolts. "Karen, these are serious allegations," Greg said when she finished. "Harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress can result in significant financial damages. If there's any evidence of criminal conduct, you could face jail time." "But I was just doing my job as HOA president," Karen protested. "Everything I did was within my authority. Daily property inspections, excessive violation notices, and confrontational behavior toward a single resident goes well beyond normal HOA duties," Greg explained. "A judge could easily see this as targeted harassment. So what do I do?" "You need to stop all contact with this neighbor immediately. Don't go near his property. Don't issue any more violation notices. Don't discuss him with other neighbors. Any further contact could be seen as violating the restraining order." Karen hung up feeling more desperate than ever. For 8 years, she had controlled every aspect of life in Willowbrook Estates. Now she was being told she could not even walk past Marcus Sullivan's house without risking legal trouble. Tuesday morning brought more bad news. Karen received a phone call from Spike, and the biker leader sounded furious. "The cops came to see me yesterday," Spike announced without preamble. "They're asking questions about Saturday morning. Asking who hired us to visit your neighborhood." Karen's blood turned to ice. "What did you tell them?" "I told them we were just riding through the area and stopped to ask for directions," Spike lied. "But they didn't believe me. They know we were hired by someone. You can't tell them anything," Karen pleaded. "We both go to prison if they find out." "That's your problem, lady. My problem is that the cops are now watching my club. They're looking for any excuse to bust us for something. You brought heat down on us with your stupid suburban drama. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to fix this," Spike growled. "Call off your neighbor. Make him drop the investigation. Do whatever it takes to get the cops to stop looking at us." "I can't call off Marcus Sullivan. I have a restraining order that prevents me from even talking to him." "Then you better find another way," Spike said. "Because if the cops trace this back to me, I'm going to trace it back to you. And trust me, lady, you don't want me showing up at your door again." Karen spent the rest of Tuesday in a state of panic. The Thunderbolts were threatening her. The police were investigating. Marcus Sullivan was suing her. Her entire world was falling apart. Wednesday brought the worst news yet. Karen received a certified letter informing her that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for Friday evening. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss allegations of misconduct by the current HOA president and to consider appropriate disciplinary action. Karen realized that other board members had learned about the restraining order and lawsuit. They were moving to remove her from office before she could cause more damage to the association. For 8 years, Karen had ruled the HOA board with absolute authority. The other members were neighbors who had reluctantly agreed to serve and were happy to let Karen handle all the work. They rubber-stamped her decisions and supported her enforcement activities without question, but now they were scared. If Karen's harassment of Marcus Sullivan resulted in legal trouble for the HOA, all the board members could be held personally liable. They were trying to distance themselves from her before the situation got worse. Thursday morning, Karen decided to take drastic action. Despite the restraining order, despite her lawyer's warnings, despite everything she had been told, she decided to confront Marcus Sullivan directly. She would apologize, explain that everything had been a misunderstanding, and convince him to drop the lawsuit. Karen waited until she saw Marcus leave his house in his pickup truck. Then she walked across the street and positioned herself in his driveway, determined to force a conversation when he returned. Marcus came home 30 minutes later with groceries from the supermarket. He saw Karen standing in his driveway and immediately pulled out his phone to call the police. "Mr. Sullivan, please," Karen called out. "I just want to talk." "I want to apologize." Marcus kept his distance and continued talking to the police dispatcher. Karen could hear him reporting a restraining order violation and requesting immediate assistance. "This is all a misunderstanding," Karen shouted. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to maintain community standards." Marcus finished his phone call and looked at Karen with cold eyes. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are violating a court order by being on my property. The police are on their way. I suggest you leave immediately. Please just listen to me," Karen begged. "I can make this all go away. I can fix everything. The only thing you can do is leave my property and never return," Marcus replied calmly. "You brought this situation on yourself through your own choices." Karen heard police sirens in the distance. She realized that Marcus was not going to listen to her apology or drop the charges. He was treating her like a criminal who needed to be arrested. "You don't understand," Karen screamed. "I run this neighborhood. I've been protecting property values for 8 years. You can't just move in here and destroy everything I've built." "Mrs. Whitfield, what you built was a system of harassment and intimidation," Marcus said. "That system is coming to an end whether you accept it or not." The police cruiser pulled into Marcus's driveway with lights flashing. Officers Rodriguez and Chen got out of the car and immediately approached Karen. "Ma'am, you're in violation of a restraining order," Officer Rodriguez said. "You need to come with us. This is insane." Karen protested as the officers escorted her toward their car. "I was just trying to apologize. I was trying to be reasonable." "You can explain that to the judge," Officer Chen replied. As the police car drove away with Karen in the back seat, neighbors throughout Willowbrook Estates watched from their windows and doorsteps. Word of the arrest spread quickly through the community. By evening, everyone knew that their HOA president had been taken away in handcuffs for violating a restraining order. Karen spent Thursday night in the county jail, unable to make bail until her lawyer arrived Friday morning. The arrest was reported in the local newspaper's police blotter. Karen's mugshot appeared online alongside charges of harassment and contempt of court. Friday evening's emergency HOA board meeting was brief and decisive. With Karen still dealing with her legal problems, the remaining board members voted unanimously to remove her from all positions within the association. They also voted to hire an independent management company to handle HOA operations until new elections could be held. Sarah Morrison, the young mother who had been intimidated by Karen for years, was chosen as interim president. Her first official act was to announce a comprehensive review of all HOA rules and enforcement procedures. "We want Willowbrook Estates to be a place where families can live peacefully, without fear of harassment," Sarah declared. "The era of petty tyranny is over." When Karen was finally released from jail Saturday morning, she returned to a neighborhood that had fundamentally changed. The other residents no longer looked at her with fear or respect. They looked at her with disgust and anger. Frank stopped by her house Saturday afternoon to deliver a message from the new HOA board. "Karen, the board has voted to ban you from all HOA meetings and activities. Frank said sadly. You're also prohibited from serving in any official capacity for the next 5 years. They can't do that, Karen protested. I built this HOA. I made this neighborhood what it is. What you made was a dictatorship, Frank replied. Marcus Sullivan just helped us realize we didn't have to live under it anymore. Karen spent the weekend alone in her house, watching through her windows as neighbors gathered to discuss the changes coming to Willowbrook Estates. They talked about eliminating petty rules and focusing on genuine community improvement. They talked about treating each other with respect and kindness. None of them talked about Karen Whitfield. She had become irrelevant in the community she had once controlled. Sunday evening, Karen received a phone call from her real estate agent. Karen, I think you should consider selling your house, the agent said. Word about your legal troubles is spreading. It's going to be very difficult for you to continue living in Willowbrook Estates after everything that's happened. Karen hung up and sat in her empty living room. In less than a week, she had lost everything that mattered to her. Her authority was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. Her neighbors hated her. Her legal troubles were just beginning, all because she had underestimated Marcus Sullivan. The man she had tried to intimidate had systematically dismantled her life with surgical precision. He had turned her own weapons against her and exposed her as the petty tyrant she had always been. The phone rang in Karen Whitfield's kitchen at exactly noon. She had been pacing around her house for 2 hours, trying to process what she had witnessed from her window. The sight of Marcus Sullivan defeating 8 bikers played over and over in her mind like a terrible movie she could not turn off. Karen grabbed the phone with shaking hands. Hello? Lady, we need to talk. It was Spike's voice, but he sounded different. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by anger and confusion. What happened out there? Karen demanded. You were supposed to intimidate him, not get beaten up by him. You didn't tell us the guy was some kind of special forces ninja, Spike replied. You said he was just a military veteran who needed to be put in his place. He is just a military veteran. Lady, regular military guys don't move like that. Regular military guys don't knock out bikers in 3 seconds. This guy's something else entirely. Karen felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying you lied to us about what we were walking into, Spike growled. My boys are talking about never coming back to this neighborhood. Some of them want to call the cops and report what that psycho did to me. You can't call the police. Karen protested. You were trespassing on his property. We were delivering a message like you paid us to do, Spike shot back. We didn't sign up to fight some kind of super soldier. Just calm down and think about this rationally, Karen said, though she was anything but calm herself. One man can't defeat 8 bikers. There must be some explanation. Yeah, there is an explanation, Spike replied. The explanation is that your neighbor could probably kill all 8 of us with his bare hands if he wanted to. We're lucky he just knocked me out instead of doing something permanent. Karen's mind raced. She had paid these men $2,000 to solve her Marcus problem. Instead, they had made everything worse. Now the entire neighborhood knew that Marcus was some kind of dangerous fighter. Worse, the bikers might go to the police or try to get revenge. What do you want me to do? Karen asked. We want the rest of our money, Spike said. And then we want to forget this whole thing ever happened. But you didn't complete the job. Lady, the job was to intimidate one suburban guy. Nobody told us we'd be facing off against Jason Bourne. We showed up, we delivered your message, and we left. Job completed. Karen argued for several more minutes, but Spike would not budge. She eventually agreed to pay the remaining $1,000. The Thunderbolts would pick up their money and never return to Willowbrook Estates. After hanging up, Karen collapsed into a kitchen chair. Her carefully planned solution had become a disaster. She had spent $2,000 to prove that Marcus Sullivan was not someone who could be intimidated. She had demonstrated to the entire neighborhood that her enemy was far more formidable than anyone had imagined. Worse, she had revealed her own desperation. People would start asking questions about why 8 bikers had shown up at Marcus's house. Someone might figure out that Karen had hired them. If that happened, she could face criminal charges for conspiracy or harassment. Karen spent the rest of Saturday hiding in her house, afraid to show her face in the neighborhood. She watched through her windows as neighbors gathered in small groups to discuss what they had witnessed. Sarah and her husband stood in their front yard talking with Frank. Dorothy walked over to join their conversation. Even the quiet Johnson family came outside to hear what had happened. Everyone was talking about Marcus Sullivan and the biker incident. Everyone was impressed by how he had handled the situation. Everyone was wondering what kind of military background could produce such impressive fighting skills. Sunday morning brought a new horror for Karen. She woke up to find a police cruiser parked in front of Marcus's house. 2 officers were standing in his driveway, apparently interviewing him about the previous day's events. Karen watched through her binoculars as Marcus spoke calmly with the police. He gestured toward his driveway where the confrontation had taken place. He pointed to various positions where the bikers had stood. The officers took notes and nodded sympathetically. After 30 minutes, the police officers shook hands with Marcus and returned to their car. But instead of leaving, they drove directly to Karen's house and knocked on her front door. Karen's heart pounded as she opened the door. The 2 officers were middle-aged men with serious expressions and professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez and this is Officer Chen," the first policeman said. "We're investigating an incident that occurred yesterday morning involving 8 motorcycle riders and your neighbor, Mr. Sullivan." "I don't know anything about that," Karen said quickly. "Mr. Sullivan mentioned that he's been having some disputes with neighbors about HOA issues," Officer Chen said. He thought the bikers might have been sent by someone in the neighborhood. Karen felt sweat forming on her forehead. "That's ridiculous. Why would anyone in this neighborhood hire bikers?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Officer Rodriguez replied. "Do you know of anyone who might have had problems with Mr. Sullivan? Anyone who might have wanted to intimidate him?" "No," Karen lied. "I mean, there have been some minor HOA violations, but nothing that would justify something like that." The officers exchanged glances. Officer Chen consulted his notebook. "Mr. Sullivan mentioned that you've been particularly active in documenting his violations. He said you visit his property almost daily to look for problems." "I'm the HOA president," Karen said defensively. "It's my job to ensure community standards are maintained." "Daily visits seem excessive for minor infractions," Officer Rodriguez observed. "Some people might consider that harassment." Karen felt the walls closing in around her. The police were clearly suspicious of her involvement. If they investigated further, they might discover her connection to Tony and the Thunderbolts. "Officers, I can assure you that I had nothing to do with those bikers," Karen said. "I was as shocked as anyone to see them in our neighborhood." "Where were you yesterday morning around 9 a.m.? Officer Chen asked. "I was at home, in my kitchen, making breakfast." "Did you see the incident occur?" Karen hesitated. If she admitted to watching the confrontation, they might ask more questions about why she had been looking out her window at exactly the right time. "I heard the motorcycles and looked outside," she said carefully, "but I was too far away to see what happened clearly." The officers spent a few more minutes asking general questions about neighborhood tensions and recent disputes. Karen answered as vaguely as possible, trying not to reveal any information that might implicate her. Finally, the police officers left, but not before warning Karen that hiring people to intimidate neighbors was a serious crime. "If we discover that anyone in this neighborhood was involved in yesterday's incident, they'll face charges for conspiracy and criminal harassment," Officer Rodriguez said. After the police left, Karen sat in her living room and tried to think. She was in serious trouble, but she was not caught yet. The police suspected her involvement but had no proof. The Thunderbolts would keep quiet to avoid their own legal problems. As long as she stayed calm and said nothing, she might escape consequences. But Karen's real problem was not legal trouble. Her real problem was Marcus Sullivan himself. The biker incident had changed everything in Willowbrook Estates. Marcus was no longer just a new neighbor who challenged HOA rules. He was now known as someone who could defeat 8 attackers without breaking a sweat. He had become a neighborhood legend overnight. Other residents were looking at him with new respect and admiration. They were also looking at Karen with new suspicion and fear. If the HOA president was capable of hiring bikers to intimidate people, what else might she do to neighbors who crossed her? Karen's reign of terror in Willowbrook Estates was coming to an end. She had tried to destroy Marcus Sullivan and had only succeeded in destroying herself. The man she had underestimated was about to become her worst nightmare. Monday morning brought the final blow. Karen woke up to find a legal document taped to her front door. It was a restraining order filed by Marcus Sullivan, prohibiting her from approaching his property, contacting him directly, or harassing him in any way. The document also included a civil lawsuit for harassment, intimidation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Marcus was seeking damages and attorney fees. More importantly, he was demanding a full investigation into Karen's conduct as HOA president. Karen read the legal papers with growing horror. Marcus had evidence of her daily harassment visits. He had documented every petty violation notice she had given him. He had recorded their confrontations and photographed her surveillance activities. Worse, the lawsuit mentioned additional evidence of criminal conspiracy currently under investigation by local law enforcement. Marcus clearly suspected her involvement with the bikers, and he was building a case to prove it. Karen realized that her war against Marcus Sullivan was not just lost. It was about to destroy her completely. The man she had tried to intimidate was systematically dismantling her life with the same precision he had used to defeat 8 bikers. The nightmare was just beginning. And Karen was about to discover that some enemies were too dangerous to make. The sound started as a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across a clear sky. Marcus Sullivan looked up from washing his truck, water dripping from the sponge in his hand. His trained ears immediately identified the noise, multiple motorcycle engines growing louder and closer. Marcus had heard that sound before in different countries under different circumstances. Sometimes it meant friendly forces arriving, sometimes it meant trouble was coming. The part of his brain that had kept him alive for 20 years in dangerous places suddenly became very alert. The rumble grew into a roar as 8 Harley-Davidson motorcycles turned onto Maple Street. They rode in formation, their engines loud and deliberately intimidating. Chrome gleamed in the morning sunlight. Leather jackets and bandanas flapped in the wind. To most suburban residents, they would have looked terrifying. Marcus simply watched and waited. His posture did not change, but his mind shifted into a different mode. 20 years of military training kicked in automatically. He assessed the approaching threat with the cold calculation of a professional soldier. 8 riders. All male, all large. Ages approximately 25 to 45. Riding expensive bikes, so probably not desperate criminals. Leather clothing suggested they wanted to look intimidating rather than actually being dangerous. Formation riding showed organization and planning. This was not a random encounter. The motorcycles turned into Marcus's driveway and arranged themselves in a semicircle around him. 8 men dismounted with practiced coordination. They moved with the swagger of people who were used to intimidating others, but Marcus noticed they kept their hands visible and did not reach for any weapons. These were bullies, not killers. That was useful information. The largest biker stepped forward. He was about 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed perhaps 250 pounds. His arms were covered with tattoos and his beard reached halfway down his chest. A patch on his jacket read Spike in red letters. "You Marcus Sullivan?" Spike asked in a voice meant to sound menacing. "I am," Marcus replied calmly. He continued holding the sponge, though his grip had changed slightly. In his hands, even a car washing sponge could become a weapon if necessary. "We need to have a conversation with you," Spike announced. "About how you've been treating your neighbors." Marcus glanced around at the other bikers. They had positioned themselves to block his escape routes. Standard intimidation tactics. "Amateur hour. Which neighbors would those be?" Marcus asked. "Don't play dumb," Spike growled. "You know exactly what this is about. You've been causing problems in this neighborhood, making trouble for people who just want to live in peace." Marcus almost smiled. Karen had actually hired bikers to intimidate him. The woman's delusions of power were even worse than he had thought. "I see," Marcus said. "And you gentlemen are here to explain proper neighborhood etiquette to me?" "We're here to explain that actions have consequences," said another biker, a thin man with a goatee. "When you mess with the wrong people, sometimes those people take action. Sometimes suburban tough guys need to learn some respect," added a third biker. "Military heroes ain't so tough when they're outnumbered." Now Marcus did smile, though it was not a friendly expression. These men had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought they were intimidating some weekend warrior who had spent his military service safely behind a desk. "Gentlemen," Marcus said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Spike replied. "You need to start following the rules like everyone else. Stop causing trouble for your neighbors. Stop thinking you're special because you wore a uniform. And if I don't, then we'll have to come back and explain things more clearly," Spike said. He took a step closer to Marcus. "Maybe next time we won't be so polite." That was when Spike made his fatal mistake. He reached out and grabbed Marcus's shoulder with his meaty hand. 20 years of Delta Force training exploded into action. Marcus moved faster than any of the bikers thought possible. The sponge flew from his hand as he grabbed Spike's wrist with both hands. A precise twist broke Spike's grip and sent a jolt of pain up his arm. Before the big man could react, Marcus had stepped inside his reach and driven an elbow into his solar plexus. Spike doubled over, gasping for air. Marcus grabbed the back of his head and drove his knee upward, connecting with Spike's forehead. The biker leader collapsed backward onto the driveway, unconscious before he hit the concrete. The whole sequence took less than 3 seconds. The other bikers stared in shock. Their tough leader was lying motionless on the ground, and the suburban homeowner was standing over him, breathing normally. None of them had even seen exactly what happened. "Holy shit," whispered the man with the goatee. 2 bikers rushed forward to help their fallen leader. Marcus let them approach but positioned himself to react if they tried to attack him instead of helping Spike. They knelt beside their unconscious friend and tried to wake him up. "What the hell did you do to him?" demanded a biker with a shaved head. "I defended myself," Marcus replied calmly. "Your friend made the mistake of putting his hands on me." The remaining bikers looked at each other uncertainly. This was not going according to plan. They had expected to intimidate a civilian, not to have their leader knocked unconscious in seconds. A young biker with nervous eyes stepped forward. "Look, man, we don't want any real trouble. We just came here to deliver a message." "Message delivered," Marcus said. "Now you can leave." "We can't just leave Spike here," protested another biker. "Then wake him up and take him with you," Marcus suggested. "But do it quickly before I decide you're all trespassing on my property." The bikers worked frantically to revive their leader. They slapped his face and called his name. Finally, Spike's eyes fluttered open. He looked around in confusion, trying to remember where he was and what had happened. "What? How?" Spike mumbled. "You got knocked out," the goateed biker explained quietly. "We need to go." Spike struggled to his feet with help from 2 of his friends. He swayed unsteadily and touched the growing bruise on his forehead. His eyes focused on Marcus with a mixture of confusion and anger. "This ain't over," Spike said weakly. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. His voice carried a tone of absolute certainty that made all 8 bikers take an involuntary step backward. "If any of you come back to this neighborhood, if any of you approach me or my neighbors again, if any of you even drive down this street, I will consider it a hostile action." "Do you understand what that means?" The bikers looked at each other nervously. They were beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated their target. "You threatening us?" asked the young biker with nervous eyes. "I'm explaining the rules of engagement," Marcus said. "You came here to intimidate someone you thought was weak. You discovered you were wrong. Now you have a choice. You can leave peacefully and forget this address exists. Or you can escalate the situation and learn exactly what kind of military training I received." Marcus took a step forward, and all 8 bikers instinctively moved backward. "I spent 20 years in places where people killed each other over much smaller disagreements than this," Marcus continued. "I learned to handle problems quickly and permanently. I retired from that life because I wanted peace, but I didn't forget my skills. Test me if you want, but understand the consequences." Spike was helped onto his motorcycle by 2 of his friends. The other bikers mounted their bikes quickly, engines roaring to life. They were eager to leave this suburban nightmare behind. "This neighborhood's got some crazy people in it," one biker called out as they prepared to leave. "Yes, it does," Marcus agreed. "Remember that." The Thunderbolts rode out of Marcus's driveway and down Maple Street much faster than they had arrived. Within minutes, the sound of their engines faded into the distance. The peaceful Saturday morning returned to Willowbrook Estates. Marcus picked up his sponge and resumed washing his truck. His hands were steady and his breathing was normal. 20 years of combat experience had taught him to handle violence without letting it affect him emotionally. What had just happened was simply another problem that needed solving. Across the street, Karen Whitfield stood at her window in complete shock. She had watched the entire confrontation through her binoculars. She had seen Marcus disable the biker leader in seconds. She had heard the fear in the Thunderbolts' voices as they prepared to leave. This was not how things were supposed to go. The bikers were supposed to intimidate Marcus into submission. He was supposed to apologize and beg for mercy. He was supposed to move away in shame. Instead, Marcus had defeated 8 grown men without even breathing hard. He had sent professional intimidators running scared from his driveway. He had made Karen's hired muscle look like amateur bullies. Worse, other neighbors had witnessed the confrontation. Sarah and her husband had watched from their front porch. Frank had come outside to see what the noise was about. Dorothy had peeked through her curtains. The whole neighborhood had seen Marcus Sullivan stand up to 8 bikers and win. Karen realized she had made a terrible mistake. Instead of solving her Marcus problem, she had made it much worse. She had tried to intimidate a man who could not be intimidated. She had attacked someone who was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And now everyone in Willowbrook Estates knew it. Karen Whitfield paced around her living room like a caged animal. She clutched her phone in one hand and a stack of violation notices in the other. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Sullivan had challenged her at the HOA meeting, and the situation was getting worse every day. Other neighbors were starting to ask questions. Sarah from down the street had called to inquire about the doormat rule. Dorothy had asked why her bird feeder was banned while the Johnsons' garden gnomes were allowed. Even quiet old Frank had mentioned that some HOA rules seemed a bit strict during their conversation yesterday. Karen could not allow this rebellion to spread. She had worked too hard to build her authority in Willowbrook Estates. For 8 years, she had been the undisputed queen of the neighborhood. Everyone followed her rules without question. Everyone respected her position. Everyone knew that Karen Whitfield was in charge. Then Marcus Sullivan had moved in and ruined everything. Karen had tried all her usual tactics. She had written violation notices for every tiny infraction she could find. She had embarrassed him at the HOA meeting. She had complained to other neighbors about his disruptive attitude. Nothing had worked. The man just kept following her rules while politely questioning why they existed. That was the problem. Marcus was not actually breaking any rules. He painted his mailbox green, closed his garage door on time, and kept his grass at the proper height. But he did it all with a calm confidence that made Karen furious. He followed her orders while making it clear that he thought they were stupid. Worse, other neighbors were starting to notice. They were beginning to see that Marcus could stand up to Karen without terrible consequences. Some of them were even starting to stand up for themselves. Yesterday, Robert had refused to trim his tree any shorter, after Karen demanded another 6 inches be removed. "I think it's fine the way it is," he had said with a smile. "Thanks for your concern, though." 2 days ago, Sarah had told Karen that her children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk were temporary art projects and would not be washed away immediately. "Kids need to be kids," she had said cheerfully. Frank had actually laughed when Karen complained about his morning newspaper landing in the wrong spot. "I'll mention it to the delivery boy," he had said, "but I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you." This was exactly what Karen had feared. Marcus Sullivan was like a virus, spreading disrespect and rebellion throughout her perfectly ordered community. If she did not stop him soon, her entire system would collapse. Karen had considered going to the police, but she knew they would not take her seriously. All her complaints were about HOA violations, not actual crimes. She had thought about hiring a lawyer, but legal action would be expensive and slow. She needed something that would solve the Marcus problem quickly and permanently. That was when Karen remembered her brother-in-law Tony's connections. Tony Whitfield was married to Karen's younger sister Linda. He worked at a motorcycle repair shop downtown and knew all kinds of rough characters. Over the years, Tony had mentioned various friends who could handle problems for the right price. Karen had never paid attention to these stories before, but now they seemed very interesting. Karen called Tony that evening. "Hey, Karen," Tony answered. "What's up?" "Linda's not here right now." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you," Karen said. "I have a situation in my neighborhood that requires some special handling." Tony was quiet for a moment. "What kind of situation?" "There's a new resident who's causing problems for the whole community. He's disruptive and disrespectful. He's undermining neighborhood standards and encouraging others to break rules. I need someone to explain to him that his behavior is unacceptable." "You want someone to talk to him?" "I want someone to make it clear that he needs to either follow community standards or find somewhere else to live," Karen said. "Sometimes people need stronger encouragement than just HOA notices." Tony was quiet again. Karen could hear machinery running in the background. "This guy threaten you or anything?" "Not directly," Karen admitted. "But he's definitely intimidating. He's some kind of military veteran who thinks he can push people around. I'm concerned about what might happen if someone doesn't set him straight. Military, huh? Tony sounded more interested. What branch? I don't know exactly. Some kind of special forces, I think. He has that arrogant attitude they all get. Tony laughed. Yeah, I know the type. Think they're tough because they wore a uniform. Most of them fold pretty quick when they meet real bikers. So you know people who could help? I might, Tony said carefully. But this kind of help ain't free, Karen. Good intimidation costs money. How much money? Depends on what you want done. A conversation to explain neighborhood manners might run you $2,000. Something more persuasive would cost extra. Karen thought about her savings account. $2,000 was a lot of money, but her authority in Willowbrook Estates was worth more than that. If she lost control of the neighborhood, she lost everything that made her feel important and powerful. Just a conversation, Karen said. I want him to understand that his behavior has consequences. I'll talk to some guys, Tony promised. Give me a few days to set something up. 3 days later, Tony called Karen back. Got your problem solved, he announced. Know a group called the Thunderbolts. They're not hardcore outlaws, but they look scary enough to make a point. 8 guys with loud bikes and leather jackets. They'll ride over to your neighborhood this Saturday morning and have a friendly chat with your military friend. What exactly will they do? Nothing illegal, Tony assured her. Just explain that he needs to be more respectful to his neighbors. Sometimes hearing it from the right people makes all the difference. And it will cost $2,000? $2,000 cash, Tony confirmed. Half up front, half when the job's done. These guys are professionals, Karen. They know how to handle suburban tough guys. Karen agreed to the arrangement. She withdrew $1,000 from her savings account and met Tony at a diner outside town to hand over the money. Tony gave her a business card with a phone number written on the back. Call that number Saturday morning and tell them where to find your guy. Tony instructed. They'll take care of the rest. Karen spent the rest of the week planning Marcus's comeuppance. She imagined the look on his face when 8 bikers showed up at his house. She pictured him backing down and apologizing for all the trouble he had caused. She fantasized about him moving away in shame while the whole neighborhood watched. Saturday. Morning could not come fast enough, Karen. Woke up early on Saturday and positioned herself at her front window with a pair of binoculars. She had a perfect view of Marcus's house from her living room. She wanted to see every moment of his humiliation. At exactly 9 o'clock, Karen called the number Tony had given her. Yeah? Answered a gruff voice. This is Karen Whitfield. Tony Whitfield's sister-in-law. We discussed a neighborhood problem. Right, where's the target? Target? Karen hesitated. She did not like that word. The guy you want us to talk to. Oh. Right. He lives at 1247 Maple Street, blue house with white trim. He's usually outside on Saturday mornings washing his truck. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Karen hung up and returned to her window. Sure enough, Marcus was in his driveway with a bucket and sponge cleaning his pickup truck. He looked relaxed and peaceful, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Karen smiled. In 20 minutes, Marcus Sullivan would learn what happened to people who challenged Karen Whitfield's authority. He would discover that there were consequences for disrespecting the HOA president. He would understand that some battles were not worth fighting. Karen had no idea that she was about to learn a few lessons herself. Marcus Sullivan was not just any military veteran. He was not some weekend warrior who had spent his service time pushing papers or working in supply warehouses. Marcus Sullivan was a Delta Force operator who had spent 20 years perfecting the art of violence. He had killed terrorists with his bare hands in places Karen could not pronounce. He had survived firefights that would have left most people catatonic with fear. He had been trained by the best special operations instructors in the world to handle any threat that might come his way. Karen thought she was sending 8 tough guys to intimidate a suburban homeowner. What she was actually doing was sending 8 amateur bullies to confront one of the most dangerous men in America. In 15 minutes, Karen Whitfield would discover the difference between someone who looked tough and someone who actually was tough. She would learn that there were levels of violence she had never imagined, and that her military neighbor had operated at those levels for most of his adult life. The Thunderbolts were about to meet someone who would change their perspective on what it meant to be intimidating. And Karen was about to realize that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Marcus continued washing his truck, humming quietly to himself. Birds sang in the trees above him. Children played in yards down the street. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in a peaceful neighborhood. In 10 minutes, that peace would be shattered by the sound of 8 Harley-Davidson motorcycles roaring down Maple Street. And in 12 minutes, Karen Whitfield would learn that some problems could not be solved with money and intimidation. The thunderbolts were coming, but they had no idea what they were riding into. Karen's face turned red. "Mr. Sullivan, if you have specific concerns about your own violations, we can discuss them after the meeting. This is not the appropriate forum for personal complaints." "I'm not making personal complaints," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm asking about consistent enforcement of community rules. For example, Section 9 about doormat placement seems to be applied selectively." "Are you questioning my authority as HOA president?" Karen demanded. "I'm asking about fairness and rule enforcement," Marcus said. "That's a reasonable question for any community member to ask." Karen slammed her hand on the podium. "Mr. Sullivan, you have been nothing but trouble since the day you moved in. You clearly have no respect for community standards or proper authority. If you cannot follow simple rules like everyone else, perhaps this neighborhood is not right for you." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several people looked shocked at Karen's outburst. Frank shook his head sadly. The young mother turned to whisper urgently to her husband. Marcus remained standing and calm. His military training had taught him to stay cool under pressure. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have followed every rule you've given me. I painted my mailbox green, I closed my garage door on time, and I maintain my property exactly as specified. What I'm asking for is equal treatment with other residents." "How dare you speak to me like that?" Karen shouted. "I have been protecting this neighborhood's property values for 8 years. I will not be lectured by some newcomer who thinks he can waltz in here and change everything." Marcus sat back down without responding. He had gotten the answer he needed. Karen was not interested in fair enforcement of reasonable rules. She was interested in power and control. She used the HOA as her personal kingdom, where she could make people do whatever she wanted. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Marcus in the parking lot. They apologized for Karen's behavior and shared their own stories of harassment. "She made us repaint our entire house because she said the color was too blue," said the young mother, whose name was Sarah. "We had to take out a loan to pay for it. She forced me to remove a bird feeder because she claimed it attracted pests," said an older woman named Dorothy. "I've had that feeder for 15 years without any problems. She tried to make me cut down a tree that was supposedly too tall," added a middle-aged man named Robert. "I had to hire a lawyer to prove the tree was legal under city ordinances." Marcus listened to story after story of Karen's abuse of power. She had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and everyone was afraid to stand up to her. The few people who had tried to challenge her had either given up or moved away. "Why doesn't someone run against her for HOA president?" Marcus asked. "She controls the election process," Frank explained. "She schedules the meetings, counts the votes, and determines who's eligible to run. Last time someone tried to challenge her, she found technicalities to disqualify them." Marcus walked home thinking about what he had learned. Karen was not just a petty bureaucrat. She was a bully who had figured out how to use official rules to torment people. She had created a system where she could never lose and everyone else had to suffer in silence. The next morning, Karen arrived at Marcus's house earlier than usual. She had her clipboard and camera ready, plus a measuring tape and a small notebook. She spent 30 minutes examining every inch of his front yard and porch. "Your newspaper was delivered 3 inches outside the designated delivery zone," she announced. "Section 21 clearly states that newspapers must be placed within 2 feet of the front door." Marcus looked at his newspaper, which was lying on his front walkway exactly where the delivery person had thrown it. "I don't control where the newspaper company delivers it. You are responsible for ensuring all items on your property comply with HOA standards," Karen replied. "This includes newspapers, mail, packages, and any other deliveries. So you want me to move my newspaper every morning?" "I want you to contact the newspaper company and instruct them on proper delivery procedures," Karen said. "If they cannot comply, you will need to cancel your subscription." Marcus stared at her. The woman was actually suggesting he cancel his newspaper subscription because of where it landed on his own property. This was beyond petty. This was insane. "Mrs. Whitfield, that's an unreasonable request." "Mr. Sullivan, what's unreasonable is your continued refusal to follow community standards," Karen shot back. I'm beginning to think you're intentionally causing problems for this neighborhood. How is reading a newspaper causing problems? Your attitude is the problem, Karen said, pointing her finger at him. You think because you're some kind of military hero, you're above the rules that apply to everyone else. Well, this isn't the army, Mr. Sullivan. This is a civilized community with civilized standards. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Karen had no idea what kind of military service he had performed or what he had sacrificed for his country. She was using his service record, which she knew nothing about, as an insult. Mrs. Whitfield, I've been very patient with your requests, but you're starting to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. Are you threatening me? Karen demanded loudly. Everyone hear that? The military man just threatened me on my own street. Several neighbors had come outside to see what the shouting was about. They stood on their porches and in their yards watching the confrontation with worried expressions. Marcus realized that Karen was trying to make him look like the aggressor. She was deliberately provoking him in front of witnesses, hoping he would lose his temper and give her ammunition to use against him. I'm not threatening anyone, Marcus said calmly. I'm simply asking for reasonable treatment from my HOA president. There's nothing unreasonable about following rules, Karen replied. If you can't handle that, maybe you should find somewhere else to live. With that, Karen turned and walked away. But Marcus noticed that she walked to the house next door and began talking to his neighbor, Frank. She gestured toward Marcus's house while speaking in animated tones. Then she walked to the next house and repeated the conversation. Marcus realized that Karen was not just harassing him directly. She was also trying to turn his neighbors against him. She was spreading her version of their conflicts to anyone who would listen, trying to isolate him from potential allies. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch and thought about his situation. He had left the military to escape conflict and stress. Instead, he had found himself in a different kind of war zone. Karen Whitfield had declared war on him, and she was using every weapon at her disposal to make his life miserable. Marcus had faced down terrorists and enemy soldiers. He had survived combat missions that would give most people nightmares. But dealing with Karen was a different kind of challenge. She could not be defeated with weapons or tactics. She could only be defeated by outsmarting her at her own game. The question was whether Marcus wanted to fight that battle. He could always sell the house and move somewhere else. But running away from bullies had never been his style. And if he ran, Karen would just continue terrorizing the next person who crossed her path. Marcus made his decision. Karen Whitfield had picked the wrong veteran to mess with. 2 weeks after moving in, Marcus thought he had learned all of Karen's rules. He kept his mailbox green and his garage door closed. He parked correctly and mowed his lawn to exactly the right height. But Karen always found new problems. She started showing up at his house every morning at exactly 8 o'clock. She would walk around his property with her clipboard, looking for violations. She measured things with a ruler and took pictures with her phone. She wrote down the time and date of everything she considered wrong. Your welcome mat is 2 inches too far from the door, she announced one Tuesday morning. Section 9 clearly states that doormats must be placed directly against the threshold. Marcus looked down at his simple brown mat. It sat exactly where the previous owners had left it. Has anyone else been cited for this violation? That's not your concern, Karen replied. Your only concern should be following the rules like everyone else. But Marcus had been watching the neighborhood. He noticed that other people's welcome mats were in different positions. Some neighbors had decorative items on their porches that should have violated the same rules Karen quoted to him. It seemed like she was applying the rules differently to different people. Marcus decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting. He wanted to understand how the organization worked and maybe meet some reasonable neighbors. The meeting was held in the community center on the third Thursday of every month. When Marcus arrived, he found about 15 people sitting in folding chairs facing a small stage. Karen stood at a podium with a microphone, reading from a prepared speech about maintaining property values through strict adherence to community standards. Marcus took a seat in the back row. Several neighbors turned to look at him with sympathetic expressions. Frank, his elderly neighbor, gave him a small wave. A young woman with 2 small children sitting beside her whispered something to her husband and pointed at Marcus. Word had clearly spread about Karen's daily visits to his house. Karen's speech went on for 20 minutes. She talked about the importance of rules and the dangers of letting standards slip. She mentioned certain new residents who seemed to think they were above community expectations. Marcus realized she was talking about him without actually saying his name. When Karen finished her speech, she asked if anyone had questions or concerns. Marcus raised his hand. Yes? Karen said with obvious reluctance. Marcus stood up. I'm Marcus Sullivan, and I have a question about how violations are determined. I've noticed that different residents seem to be held to different standards for the same rules. The room went completely quiet. Everyone turned to stare at Marcus. Some people looked excited, as if they had been waiting for someone to challenge Karen. Others looked worried, as if Marcus had just signed his own death warrant. Marcus Sullivan pulled his old pickup truck into the driveway of his new home. The house was small but perfect for what he needed. After 20 years in the military, he just wanted peace and quiet. The neighborhood looked nice. The houses were clean and the yards were well kept. Children played on the sidewalks while their parents watched from porches. It seemed like the perfect place to start his new life as a civilian. Marcus had spent the last 2 decades serving in Delta Force. He had been to places most people only saw on the news. He had done things he could never talk about. Now at 42 years old, he was tired. His body ached from old injuries and his mind was ready for rest. The military pension would cover his simple needs. All he wanted was to wake up without wondering if today would be his last. He grabbed his single duffel bag from the truck bed. Everything he owned fit in that bag and a few boxes the movers had already delivered. Marcus had learned long ago not to get attached to things. Things could be lost or left behind. What mattered was being able to move quickly when needed. Old habits were hard to break. The house was a simple 2-story building with blue siding and white trim. It had a small front porch with 2 chairs. Marcus had already imagined sitting there in the mornings with his coffee, watching the world wake up. The yard was decent-sized with mature trees that would give good shade in summer. The previous owners had taken good care of everything. As Marcus walked to his front door, he noticed a woman watching him from across the street. She stood in her front yard with her arms crossed, staring at him with obvious displeasure. She was middle-aged with short blonde hair and wore a bright pink tracksuit. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell she was not happy about something. His military training had taught him to notice details about people, and this woman radiated hostility. Marcus unlocked his front door and went inside. The house smelled like fresh paint and cleaning supplies. The previous owners had done a good job preparing it for sale. The living room was empty except for a few boxes stacked against one wall. Marcus did not own much furniture. He planned to buy only what he needed. After years of sleeping on cots and floors, he did not require luxury. He walked through the house, checking each room. The kitchen was small but functional. The bedrooms were a good size. The basement was dry and clean. Everything looked exactly like it had during his inspection a month ago. Marcus felt satisfied with his purchase. For the first time in 20 years, he owned something that was truly his. The next morning, Marcus woke up early. Military habits stayed with a person forever. He made coffee and sat on his front porch to watch the sunrise. The neighborhood was quiet except for birds singing in the trees. A few people jogged past on the sidewalk. They waved at him and he waved back. This was exactly what he had hoped for. At exactly 8 o'clock, the woman from across the street marched across the road toward his house. She carried a clipboard and wore the same hostile expression from the day before. Marcus watched her approach with the calm alertness he had developed during combat deployments. Something about her movements told him this was not a friendly welcome visit. "Excuse me," the woman called out as she reached the bottom of his porch steps. "Are you the new owner of this property?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely. "Marcus Sullivan. Just moved in yesterday. I am Karen Whitfield, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she announced. The way she said it made it sound like she was introducing herself as a general or a judge. "We need to discuss several violations I observed yesterday during your move-in process." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He had been careful during the move. The movers had been professional and clean. Nothing had been damaged or left behind. "What violations?" Karen consulted her clipboard with dramatic importance. "First, your moving truck was parked facing the wrong direction. All vehicles in Willowbrook Estates must face toward the street when parked in driveways. This is clearly stated in Section 12 of the HOA bylaws." Marcus blinked. He had never heard of such a rule in any neighborhood. The truck was only here for 3 hours while they unloaded. "The rule applies to all vehicles, regardless of duration," Karen said sharply. "Second, Your garage door remained open past 6 p.m. Section 15 clearly states that garage doors must be closed between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. unless actively loading or unloading vehicles. I was organizing boxes, Marcus explained, though he wondered why he needed to explain anything to this woman. That does not constitute active loading or unloading, Karen replied. Third, and most importantly, your mailbox is the wrong color. All mailboxes in Willowbrook Estates must be hunter green, not black. Marcus looked at his mailbox. It was indeed black, just like it had been when he bought the house. The previous owners had a black mailbox. Nobody mentioned changing it during the sale process. The previous owners were also in violation, Karen said with satisfaction. They received multiple notices about it but chose to ignore our community standards. I hope you will be more cooperative. Marcus had dealt with difficult people before. Military life was full of bureaucrats and rule followers who made simple things complicated. But something about Karen's attitude bothered him more than usual. She seemed to enjoy having power over others. Her eyes gleamed when she talked about violations and rules. I'll look into these issues, Marcus said carefully. He did not want to start a war with his neighbors on his second day. You have 48 hours to correct the mailbox situation, Karen informed him. Paint and installation supplies are available at Henderson's Hardware on Main Street. Tell them Karen sent you and they'll know exactly what you need. With that, Karen turned and marched back across the street to her house. Marcus watched her go, noting the stiff way she held her shoulders and the purposeful stomps of her feet. This was a woman who thrived on conflict and control. Marcus had met people like her in the military. They usually did not last long in real dangerous situations, but in safe environments they could make everyone miserable. Marcus finished his coffee and went inside. He found the HOA paperwork that had come with his house purchase. Reading through it, he discovered that Karen was technically correct about the rules, though they seemed extremely petty. The mailbox rule was buried on page 37 of a 40-page document. The garage door rule was on page 22. The parking direction rule was on page 15. Over the next few days, Marcus tried to follow the rules while settling into his new home. He bought green paint for his mailbox. He made sure to close his garage door before 6 p.m. He parked his truck facing the street, but it seemed like every day brought a new violation notice from Karen. She complained that his grass was 3/4 of an inch too tall. She measured it with a ruler. She complained that he had left his trash cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup. She complained that his front porch light was too bright and disturbed her sleep across the street. Marcus began to realize that Karen was not interested in maintaining community standards. She was interested in having power over her neighbors. Every rule was a weapon she could use to make people do what she wanted. Every violation was a victory that proved her importance. The other neighbors began stopping by to warn Marcus about Karen. They told him stories of her harassment campaigns against previous residents. Some people had moved away just to escape her constant complaints. Others had learned to avoid her completely, sneaking in and out of their homes to prevent encounters. She's been HOA president for 8 years, explained his next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Frank. Nobody else wants the job, so she keeps getting re-elected by default. Most of us just try to stay off her radar. Marcus listened to these warnings with growing concern. He had not left the military to fight a new war in suburbia, but he also had not spent 20 years defending freedom just to be bullied by a petty tyrant in a pink tracksuit. Something would have to be done about Karen Whitfield.